The film begins with a young woman named Ellen, who is seen weeping as she summons the presence of any entity to ease her loneliness. Isolated and desperate for comfort, she calls upon her psychic abilities. Moments later, an otherworldly voice responds, claiming she has awakened him from eternal darkness. Ellen falls into a trance as the entity declares that she does not belong in this world and vows to return for her. Initially, Ellen experiences overwhelming pleasure, but her joy quickly turns to terror when a frightening figure materializes and seizes her by the throat. The scene abruptly shifts to several years later, where Ellen awakens from a nightmare beside her husband, Thomas. Their affectionate relationship is evident, though Ellen laments that their honeymoon was too short. She attempts to initiate intimacy, but Thomas reminds her of pressing business obligations. After his departure, Ellen quietly reflects that he has already secured a position that will send him far away. Thomas is next seen walking through the lively streets of Wisborg, Germany, in 1838. He arrives at his workplace, where it is revealed that he is a real estate agent. His employer, Knock, congratulates him on his marriage and praises Ellen's beauty. Knock then informs Thomas of a foreign nobleman, Count Orlok, who wishes to purchase a property in Wisborg. However, the transaction requires Thomas to travel to Orlok's remote castle in Transylvania. Though hesitant about the long journey, Thomas is persuaded when Knock assures him of generous payment and promises a permanent position upon completion of the sale. Considering his family's future, Thomas reluctantly agrees. At home, he informs Ellen of his 6-week absence. Distressed, she pleads with him not to leave, but Thomas insists that his success will allow them to buy a home and provide her with everything she deserves. That evening, Ellen cuts a lock of her hair and places it inside a locket. Meanwhile, Knock is shown performing a disturbing ritual in the nude, pledging obedience to his mysterious master. The following morning, Thomas entrusts Ellen to the care of his wealthy friend Friedrich and his wife Anna, who are raising 2 daughters and expecting another child. Ellen, visibly anxious, implores Thomas to return safely and gives him the locket before he departs on horseback. His journey leads him to a remote Transylvanian village, where he is met with hostility from the locals. An innkeeper reluctantly allows him to stay after Thomas insists on visiting Orlok's castle. The innkeeper warns him never to mention the castle, but Thomas persists. The next morning, Thomas awakens to find the village deserted and even his horse missing. Forced to continue on foot, he eventually encounters a driverless carriage that inexplicably transports him to Orlok's castle. Uneasy, Thomas enters and is immediately confronted by Count Orlok, who chastises him for his delay. Thomas apologizes and follows the Count into the grand hall, where a dinner table awaits. Orlok insists they finalize the property sale that evening, despite Thomas's suggestion to wait until morning. The Count pours him a drink with his grotesque hands, unsettling Thomas further. During the meal, Thomas accidentally cuts his finger, prompting Orlok to offer assistance. As the Count approaches, Thomas grows increasingly terrified. The following morning, Thomas awakens disoriented on the floor and discovers bite marks on his chest, leaving him horrified. A flashback reveals Orlok presenting Thomas with a deed inscribed in an ancient language. The Count seizes Ellen's locket, remarking on Thomas's fortune in finding love, before forcing him to sign the contract and handing him a bag of gold. When Thomas expresses his desire to return home due to illness, Orlok refuses, warning that travel in poor health is ill-fated. With the locket in his possession, Orlok departs, leaving Thomas confused and fearful. Desperate to escape, Thomas searches the castle but finds every door locked. Eventually, he discovers a hidden passage leading to a sarcophagus adorned with strange engravings. Opening it, he is horrified to find the withered body of Count Orlok. Summoning his courage, Thomas attempts to drive a stake into the creature. After Thomas flees, Count Orlok seizes Ellen's locket and establishes a sinister connection with her, ominously warning that her husband will soon be lost to her. In a startling revelation, it becomes clear that the mysterious entity Ellen summoned years earlier is none other than Orlok himself. Thomas finally realizes that Orlok is a vampire who fed on his blood the previous night, just as he once preyed upon Ellen. Meanwhile, Friedrich grows concerned after witnessing Ellen sleepwalking and promptly calls upon Dr. Sievers. The physician discusses possible causes of her condition and advises that she be restrained if her episodes worsen. When Ellen begins moaning in her sleep, Sievers administers sedatives to calm her. At the same time, Thomas awakens in the castle, pursued by monstrous dogs. He narrowly escapes by leaping from a window into a river. The following day, Dr. Sievers learns of a deranged patient admitted to the hospital. The patient is revealed to be Knock, who is surrounded by dead animals and behaving hysterically. He proclaims that his master is coming and even consumes a dove before Sievers. When questioned, Knock suddenly lunges at the doctor. That evening, Ellen suffers violent convulsions, repeatedly crying out, "He is coming." Sievers compares her condition to Knock's and suggests consulting his former professor, Dr. Albin. Elsewhere, a nun discovers Thomas unconscious in the river and brings him to a church for treatment. The nuns warn that the devil has claimed his soul and urge him to remain within the sanctuary, where evil cannot enter. Concerned for Ellen, Thomas refuses and departs. Meanwhile, Sievers and Friedrich visit Dr. Albin, who greets his former student warmly. Upon meeting Friedrich, Albin immediately deduces that a young woman in his household suffers from a strange affliction, astonishing the pair with his insight. Thomas secures a horse and sets out to reunite with Ellen, while Orlok secretly travels to Visborg concealed within a sarcophagus aboard a ship. During the voyage, the crew begins to vomit blood and die inexplicably. The captain, noticing an infestation of rats, concludes that a plague has overtaken the vessel. Back in Visborg, Albin arrives at Friedrich's home and meets Ellen. She confides that she has always possessed psychic abilities, often foreseeing events before they occur. She recounts the time she summoned an entity during her loneliness, which has haunted her ever since through increasingly dark nightmares. Soon, Ellen falls into a trance, and Albin examines her. He pierces her skin with a needle, but she shows no reaction. Suddenly, she convulses again, repeating the ominous phrase, "He is coming." When questioned, she offers no further response. Once she calms, Albin privately informs Sievers and Friedrich that Ellen is cursed by a demon. Though skeptical, they suspect delusion, while Albin insists otherwise. Meanwhile, aboard the ship, the crew disposes of the bodies of their fallen comrades. One sailor investigates the sarcophagus, discovering that the rats originate from within. Then, without warning, at the hospital, Nock feigns illness, but when a guard approaches, he seizes the opportunity to attack and escape. Running through the streets, he cries out that his master has arrived. At the same time, Ellen suddenly declares that he is here and rushes out of the house, where she finds Thomas collapsing at the entrance. Weak and exhausted, Thomas informs her that Orlok possesses her locket. Moments later, news spreads that a ship has wrecked in the harbor, unleashing a swarm of rats that infest the city. Meanwhile, Nock reunites with Orlok and escorts him to a dilapidated mansion. Upon learning that Thomas is still alive, Nock offers to kill him, but Orlok insists that Thomas remains useful. Nock then proposes bringing Ellen to him, but Orlok refuses, stating that she must come of her own free will and cannot be forced. The following night, Thomas suffers a nightmare and instinctively pushes Ellen away. Distressed, she seeks refuge at Anna's home and spends the night there. Elsewhere, Friedrich, Sievers, and Albin convene to discuss the worsening crisis. The town is overrun with plague-bearing rats, and countless lives are being lost. Friedrich resists the notion that supernatural forces are at play, but Albin counters that not all phenomena can be explained by science. He insists that to confront the darkness, one must first acknowledge its existence. He then reveals the grim truth: they are facing an undead plague-bearer, the vampire known as Nosferatu. Later, around midnight, Ellen suddenly awakens. Orlok reminds Ellen of how she summoned him years earlier, declaring that he has now come to claim her. He reveals that Thomas signed a document binding her to him in exchange for a sack of gold. Though Ellen is skeptical, the vampire insists it is true, emphasizing that she must accept the contract of her own free will. He pleads with her to recall what they once shared and grants her 3 days to reconsider. Orlok warns that if she refuses, Thomas will suffer and everyone around her will perish. Ellen then awakens from this nightmare, only to discover her friend Anna lying on the floor, attacked by a swarm of rats. The following morning, the hospital is overwhelmed with desperate patients. Friedrich visits Anna, who feels weak and claims that the child within her is consuming her, admitting she no longer recognizes herself. Ellen attempts to warn Friedrich of the evil surrounding them, but he angrily dismisses her concerns and demands that she and Thomas leave his home. Despite Ellen's pleas, Friedrich refuses, forcing her to take her ailing husband back to their own house. That night, Ellen confesses to Thomas that she summoned Orlok years ago, unintentionally binding herself to him as his lover. She explains that while their connection initially felt blissful, it soon became torment. Thomas is stunned but remains devoted to her. Suddenly, Ellen convulses and cruelly tells him that he never satisfied her as Orlok did. Wounded by her words, Thomas aggressively makes love to her, afterward professing his love and vowing never to abandon her. Meanwhile, Albin continues his research and discovers that Nosferatu can only be destroyed if a pure maiden willingly offers her love, lying in close embrace with him until the first crow of dawn. This sacrifice would free the city from the vampire's curse and the plague he has unleashed. Ellen is thus revealed to be the sole hope of ending the terror. Later that night, Anna awakens to her daughter's screams while Friedrich sleeps. She rushes to their room and is horrified to find Orlok attacking them. The vampire slowly advances toward her. The next scene depicts the funeral of Anna and her children, leaving Friedrich devastated. Afterward, the group convenes to decide how to confront Orlok. Albin reveals that he has located the vampire's resting place and proposes destroying his sarcophagus to deprive him of sanctuary. Ellen wishes to join them, but Thomas refuses, determined to protect her. He vows to slay the vampire with an iron stake. Privately, Albin and Ellen acknowledge that such a method will not succeed. Ellen understands that she must sacrifice herself, and Albin agrees to distract Thomas so she can fulfill her mission. That evening, Thomas searches for Friedrich but discovers he is absent. At the mausoleum, Friedrich mourns his family, removing Anna's body from the grave and kissing her. Soon after, Thomas, Sievers, and Albin arrive to find Friedrich lifeless beside his wife's corpse. Distraught, they burn both bodies before proceeding to Orlok's mansion. That night, Orlok declares it is the third evening, and Ellen opens her window to summon him. Meanwhile, the trio infiltrates Orlok's mansion, navigating through a room infested with rats until they reach the sarcophagus. Thomas drives a stake into the figure inside, only to discover it is Nock, who dies instantly. Albin insists they must destroy Orlok's dwelling to strip him of sanctuary. When Thomas attempts to leave to save Ellen, Albin reveals that the vampire cannot be destroyed without her blood. Thomas realizes Albin knew the truth all along and deliberately misled him. The old man insists it was necessary and sets the mansion ablaze, while Sievers and Thomas flee. Elsewhere, Ellen dons a bridal gown and awaits Orlok. When he arrives, he asks if she consents to be his willingly. Ellen affirms, binding herself to him. They embrace passionately, and Orlok feeds upon her chest. Consumed by his hunger, he fails to notice the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window. Vulnerable to daylight, blood pours from his mouth and eyes as his body decays into a shriveled corpse. At that moment, Thomas rushes into the room and finds Orlok lifeless atop Ellen. He clasps her hand as she gazes at him one final time before succumbing to her wounds. Moments later, Albin arrives, seeking forgiveness and confirming that Ellen's sacrifice has freed the city from the Nosferatu plague.